Right. Hello. Good morning. Uh, so yesterday I had a bit of a boring stream because I got stuck in something. But after a good night's sleep, I realized what I got stuck in because we had this pivot on Impact where we went from having global and scoped stores to only having a scoped store. And there's a challenge, there's a benefit to having a scoped store, only one single global store, because you have like only one entry for consuming the actual application, but you also have one entry point to understand how the application actually works in terms of state management. But there are also some challenges. So to kind of emphasize this, we're going to use the example I fiddled around with yesterday, which is basically, wow, that's not nice. So let's take the scoped one first. So we have this application that needs to be authenticated to run. So what you would do in like a scoped version of this, you would have some kind of global context or global store or whatever that handles authentication. Maybe it does more. Maybe it has, in our case, we had like Firebase, for example. So you have Firebase as a dependency, and maybe that has like some custom API surface you design for around Firebase to avoid using the low-level Firebase API through your application. And then authentication, and then you added authentication because you want to observe the authentication state and be able to handle that in the components. So let's make this green. Wow, that's not a nice. Let's make it. Anyways, let's see. Let's make it a little bit smaller. So here we have our store, and then we would have like some component that would consume this like this. And now this component can consume the authentication. Let's call it auth. And then when it's, let's make two possible outcomes of this. And when it is authenticated, let's see. Oh, was that small? Let's make this large. Oh, sorry about that. Authentication. Let's make everything a little bit bigger here. Can I make this large, and this is small. Okay, something like that. Okay. There we go. And then authenticated. Then we go in and we have like the actual app running. And now as we mount this app, we can initialize another store for this, which is the app store. And this app store requires like a session to be like, it's instantiated as you mount the actual app component. And it gets the session from the auth. And that's what it needs to do, for example, calls to the relevant data in Firebase and everything. And maybe like in Impact, you would be able to consume this other store. So this is a good thing. It makes it easier to reason about how state management is instantiated or created as your application moves. But the problem is that if you go into this code base, you'll find like, where do you put these stores? Do you put them next to the components? But then you have to think about your app as like UI, and your folders and files are named as like components. They're not like, they're secondarily named as state or the state management aspects. And my point is, it just gets really hard to reason about how the application actually works. or how the state management works. The UI is clear because that's your components, but how your state management works is unclear. And then you have like unauthenticated here, and that leads you to like the sign in, for example. So that's great. But if you have a global state store, then this becomes more tricky, because now you might still have the same UI, but you don't have this one anymore. So, but now you have to have, where does the app come from? That's the thing. Where does it actually come from? So where it actually comes from is kind of the same. It's just that instead of having these like decoupled, loosely dependent thing here, you actually have like a hard, let's do something like this. You actually have like a hard dependency to this. So the components doesn't use the app directly or creates it. And this is this is a huge ass problem. Like if the app is going to be responsible for, sorry, so we should do this to make it perfectly clear. If the app is going to be responsible for creating the actual app store, it needs to do that during its reconciliation, right? Because it needs to it can't do a use effect and then create the app. It needs to do it during its reconciliation. But because of suspense, that initial reconciliation, which creates the app instance, might be thrown away because we throw to the suspense boundary. But we don't know that. Like, as developers, there's no hook in React that tells us when the rendering phase, as it's called, is disposed. So you have a rendering phase and you have a commit phase. The commit phase is when it actually commits it to the DOM, and it's like, now it's running and the use effect runs, and you can rely on should a component will unmount or the use effect dispose return thingy will also run. You can depend on that if it's gone through the commit phase. But if the components that has only run through the render phase and then it gets disposed, which happens during during suspense, you have created an instance of the app, but you aren't able to dispose of it. And then it runs again and creates another instance of the app, and now you have two instances of the app. So you should never use the store provider with a component that is in risk of being suspended. Right? But here we don't have this problem because we don't instantiate and dispose of other stores related to the component lifecycle. This is just state management lifecycle. So that's completely predictable. And then the components are just derived from this. So you won't have any issues with rendering phase versus commit phase and all of this stuff. The thing though is this app with the session cannot like I think we have to see this in code to kind of understand it better. But this is the question, like, how does this look like in code? This is simple in code. Like, you have just two different stores and you just kind of instantiate and use them in the components. But how would this look like in code? So we can, let's see. Let's just create like an empty file here, tsx. And we can use, is this big enough? Let's see. So we would have our actual app here. And then as part of this app, we would have Firebase, and we can say like new Firebase or something. I'm using a class here because it's like everybody kind of knows classes, even though they don't like them, and they show structure really well. And then you would have authentication, which would be the new authentication, and it depends on this Firebase. And then the question is, where do we put the app, right? We can't put the app here. We can't just create the app because we don't know yet if we're authenticated or not. We could do this and say like app. This will become app at some point. But then from the consumption of the component, how does it know? It will be implicit knowledge that when authentication has gone to authenticated, will have app. So you would kind of have to do function app. So let's say you're using the app here. So you would check if app authentication is authenticated or status equals authenticated. You would suddenly just know that, oh, now I have the app.app. But TypeScript doesn't know that. So you would have to do this. So this is what I mean. It becomes like implicit knowledge, or like the knowledge is in your head. How do you actually make proper code for this? And the way to really make proper code for this is that you have to give your application different states. So what's nice about giving it different states is that you can tie properties and methods to those states. So what I mean is there's kind of like different versions of this app. You have a version of the app which is authenticating, which is you can't do anything while it's authenticating. So the way we could express this is like app state. So you would have authenticating. So you can't do anything there. Or you could have unauthenticated. And when you're unauthenticated, you can sign in, for example. And then if you are authenticated, you would kind of create, sorry for this. This shouldn't be like app. This should be, let's just call it app initializer. Yeah, sorry. And then when you're authenticated, you would actually have the app there, right? And you would maybe have a sign out. You would probably have a user there or a session or something. The point is that you're able to explicitly express what's available to you in these different states. So it's not in the head of the developer to understand how these states correlate to each other, or these properties and the different states and everything. It's actually in the code. So when you start consuming the actual application, maybe you have like a use app hook. You would look at the app, app, let's call it app, let's put it here. Let's call it app init. App init. So you would look at the app init authentication status. If it's authenticated, then you would have app init app, or you would like throw here. So now you can actually use the app in an nested component, and you will get the correct typing and everything. Though you might use app in when the authentication status isn't authenticated, and you would actually get an error. But this is the same with using context, right? Even in this other example here, you would still have this problem of trying to use hooks where the store you're trying to consume hasn't been provided yet. Like, it's the same thing. So that's not my worry. The only way to get around that is to do props passing. Then you literally have to pass things. That's how you make it rigid, is to pass props. But you can't do that in a UI. It's just too many components and it gets difficult to change it, right? This is how, and this is the problem, or not a problem, but these unions, like for me, the journey with TypeScript made this clear to me, like how we've been developing applications, like using Cerebral and also Overmind. It's like we're using those global state stores, but we don't care about the relationship between the different states. We kind of naturally just know it intuitively as human beings, but the code doesn't know that. So when you write TypeScript code and you start creating optionals, you start overriding optionals, it's because it's just not structured in a way that the code can understand it. And that's what these unions, like, this is the most important thing, I think, to get from TypeScript. It's this concept of a union, because it represents explicit states in your application, and you're able to design what is available in these different states. And you can think about these states as even UI states. So authenticating would be like the actual initial loading, and unauthenticated is like looking at the sign-in model or sign-in page, and authenticated would be the actual app itself. Yeah, so what so I feel very confident about this, that this is a really, really good thing, because it makes everything very explicit. The thing I'm a little bit torn on is what are you going to call these things? Are you going to call them states? Are you going to call them views? Do you want your global state store to define itself as a set of views? Or is it because you have this thing, should you put UI state in your global state store? And one thing is, like, I don't think you should do like element animations in your global state store, like any like timeout or whatever is related to running an animation. But I definitely think you can have input state there, because you want to be able to like empty out that input from your state store, not only from your components. You want to like validate the input as you type it, for example, in your state store, not only in your component, all kinds of things. But then you have the question of this like view, like the view as a whole. Like, what's the name of this view? What is this state of this application? Is it currently authenticating? Is it unauthenticated? And you could flip this. You could say, you could say that this status is really just the authentication state, right? So if you change this into like app view, you could say it's a message from my partner. Our youngest, he wakes up so early. I was just searching for like bird scarecrows, like I guess scarecrows is for birds, but you have these new scarecrows that's kind of you can have at your house, because like our youngest wakes up before 6 in the morning and it's just too early. You there's this certain time in the morning where you kind of flip. For me, it's 6:30. If I wake up before 6:30, I feel hungover during the day. It doesn't really matter when I go to sleep the day before. And so pre-6 is way too early. And then we tried, like, we just got like these awesome sun shielding screens from the windows in case is it the light, like the sunlight? Is it because it's warm in his room? Or is it now the fucking birds? So now I'm gonna, later today, I'm gonna buy this bird thingy. Anyways, so my partner has this, like, yeah, and then that's the youngest. And then we have the oldest with miscommunication with going to school. Now she had to like bring them all to school, and she hasn't gotten any work done and feels like shit. And yeah, anyways, it's that's that's what it's like. And it's kind of, yeah, it kind of sucks that having kids affects, like, you have to make this very strong decision. And this is the problem when you have two people working with small kids, that like you can't work 100% like efficiently. That's impossible, because everybody experiences this with kids. Like, you will be reduced quite often. But if you're one person that's like dedicated to work, that person can work 100%. But then the other person has to make a decision, like, should I not work? Should I be home with the kids? Should I work 50% maybe? And that's the thing. Like, so I don't know why I'm diving into this. I haven't streamed in a while, so you'll have to excuse me. But this is how society is set up now. We want you to have kids. We want you to work 100%. And then typically employers, they expect you to work 100%, and you get a few days off and maybe a few days extra. But there's many companies that doesn't have any understanding of your day-to-day state, like being tired and all of that. Because you are tired a lot when you have small kids because of all this stuff I'm just talking about. Anyways, hey Alexi, just in time for my parenting rant. Hey man, it's really nice to see you. I hope you're doing well. Yeah, it's been a long time. I was just we just had this Airbnb trip, and I was looking at my Airbnb log, and because we rented this place in Vienna. I can't remember. Yeah, that was a Cerebral get together in Vienna. And also, weren't we at the conference as well? I think we rented, because I had 2 Airbnbs there. Yeah, one was the Cerebral together thing, and the other one was the conference, Reactive Conf or something. Anyways, it reminded me of the good old days. And look at me, I'm still here, reflecting on fucking state management. Anyways, let's get let's get back to it. So instead of calling it app state, you could say app view, and maybe you would give it a name instead. So you could say this would be signing in, for example, which would be authenticating. So you would still have your authentication here, which has like these different the specific technical authenticating, authenticated, and authenticated. But in terms of like consuming your app, it's more about, or that's the thing I'm questioning here. Do you want it to be, yeah, I could maybe even call it view. Unauthenticated. So this will be signed out. And this would of course be signed in. Oh, you did? Oh, awesome! With the kids and the whole family. That's nice. 2 years ago. I guess that's a very different like climate. I guess in from different perspectives, but Turkey, yeah, that's pretty warm, isn't it? But I will definitely reach out if I ever go to Turkey. I think I was invited to a conference there. Yeah, and if you ever get a chance to come to Norway, to Trondheim, you have to do the same. Let's see. Yeah, so this is a way to, you take this authentication state and then you produce the actual state of your application. The big question in my mind is, where's the boundaries here? I think that is the problem with global state management. It's like, what are the boundaries between the actual, like, it makes a lot of sense to say this is the application, this is the state management, here you have the UI, it just derives from the state of the application. That makes a lot of sense. But what is the boundary in terms of, because you're kind of saying that the state management doesn't really care about the specific UI. It's just state, and you can build different UIs on top of that state management, right? You can create a website, you could create a native app, could create a freaking CLI tool on top of that state management, the same state management. But when we start doing this kind of thing, we're also being very explicit about how does the actual application look like what's the different views. And what I'm trying to argue here, I think, is that there's a difference between a view and the UI. So you can say, from the perspective of state management, you can say that there are certain views for this application. But how you implement that view, that's an implementation detail. You can use HTML for that, using React. You can use native, you can use a CLI, but the application manages the views. So if you use a router, for example, that router is a mapping between the URL and a specific view. Yeah. So I think that's, and previously, like, when you're not dealing with this proper like typing and structuring that I'm talking about now, you don't really have to think about this, because you can just add this, oh, I might have this app there, and then, as I said, the developer knows that if you're authenticated, suddenly that app is there, and you can just safely use it. But if you're going to do it properly with typing and make the code actually understand that relationship, you have to do something like this. So maybe we should just jump in and try this, and see how it looks. Yeah. Because what I find interesting about typing is that it forces you to properly conceptualize things. You can't lean as much on just your understanding of how things are connected. You have to express it in code, or And I literally see these optionals and overrides as you not being able to express correctly the relationship between things. Yeah. Cool. Yes. So let's try this. So we have where are we? We were playing around with. Did we have? Oh, sorry. So now we have. Oh, okay. So we have to move back to, let's say, authentication, TS. I have to put that back. So just to give some context on what I'm doing here, I'm refactoring this family app. Yeah. Hi, Desm. Thanks for mentioning Overmind. Yeah, I feel the same about so with Cerebral and Overmind, that is what's also fitted my mental model the best. Like that's why I created them, of course, because it's just the most direct reflection of how I think, and I think a lot of people has a hard time mapping the primitives of the tools they use in code to their mental model. But with Overmind, it's so like, this is your state, these are your actions, these are your effects. And the fact that your actions can always go from the root and look at any state and change any state, that's also, it just removes a problem space of how do you pass information around, which because in your head you can always jump wherever you want, right? You don't have these locked pathways of, okay, if I go down this path, then I can only manage this state. And if I like, you don't think that way. You just think about your application as a whole. Anyways, so what ruined it for me was TypeScript. It really did, because I didn't have these problems before TypeScript. But I'm also thankful in the sense that it's very fun and challenging to see how can you how I'm not trying to make my app, how should I put this? I'm not trying to make my I'm not trying to change my mindset. I'm trying to figure out how can you apply this mindset to TypeScript in a way that makes sense, and that could even be helpful. Yeah, I think that's it. But I would definitely, but I might be, I might be crossing a boundary here where it gets like just impractical. Like, why make such an effort to like do this when just build the freaking app, right? Don't be so obsessed about this. But it hit us really hard when we built Code Sandbox version 1 with Overmind, and we tried to activate strict null checking on TypeScript. It just didn't work. We had so many errors in our application. And the reason is because of what I'm saying now. Like, all the code made perfect sense to us as developers, but it didn't make sense to TypeScript, because we had so much like optional state that we knew was available because of our understanding of the app, but the code didn't understand it. So if we wanted that app to actually pass the type checker, we would have to create a shit ton of if statements all over. So there was like something fundamentally wrong in the structure of that application from a coding perspective, not from like a intuition human like developer perspective. And the thing is, like, we were very efficient working on Code Sandbox version 1 with TypeScript. We just couldn't have strict null checking. So I'm definitely pushing some boundary here. But I guess that's it. Like, I was super happy about Overmind, and then I kind of I can't stop there. Kind of need to dive further and see where it goes. But yeah, anyways. So we're gonna, let's see, we have Firebase here. And our app, it shouldn't have all this stuff anymore. Let's remove this. Let's get back to scratch here. So blah, get away from me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely some, I don't know if it's a passion. You would think so, kind of watching like my never ending chase on this, but I don't know what it is. I have a tendency to like I don't consider myself a perfectionist. I don't know. I have no idea where it comes from. I do like, I guess like many other people, I do like constraints. I like applying constraints to problems because you have to get very, you don't necessarily need creative solutions, but you narrow down. I'm not sure how to put this. It's like, it's why I like coding, right? If you so my partner is like a chemist, and there's just the vast room of possibilities is just too big for me. Like there's so many unreliable things, even like there's so many different ways to measure things, and just nature is so vast, and it takes a long time to do the testing. It can be unreliable. There's many factors you don't know, and so on and so on. But coding is a very narrow scope tool set. You're still trying to solve many big problems, but you have such a narrow like environment and tool set to do it, and I like that because you have to become, yeah, it's like there's something about creativity. I don't think creativity comes from having every opportunity to do whatever you want. Creativity comes from having a very narrow room of opportunity or tool set, or however you want to put it. So I think that's what I like here. It's like this strict node checking is something that applies constraints to my code. And now I have to think in a different way. Like, how do I have to think differently than we did in CodeSandbox version 1, because we wouldn't be able to apply strict null checking there. So that's what I mean. Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Strict null checking applies a constraint to my code. And now I have to think differently about how I solve the same problems. And sometimes good things comes from that. Sometimes it's like an unnecessary constraint. It doesn't actually bring any value to the outcome. But I don't really care about it. It's just having that constraint. It just hits my creative process, I think. And I like being in my creative process. Yeah. Create authentication. Yeah, passion, obsession. It's definitely a thin line. Okay, so what we're going to try to apply here is this app view. So when I think about the family Scrum app, it has it definitely has like a signing in state. So let's just call it signing in, where nothing is happening. It has a signed in state. Oh, sorry. View is signed in. And and it has a signed out state. But it doesn't only have that. It also has, yeah, so this is where it kind of gets interesting. So looking at this, well, I guess you could call it, no, this is fine. This is fine. So when you're signed in, we have the actual app itself. And that's the thing I've been struggling with here, like in terminology wise, is that I'm saying we're creating the app here, which we are, but conceptually I think about the app as when you're signed in, not when you're signed out, right? So I had a hard time with the terminology here, because I feel like this is not really creating the app, it's kind of initializing the app. But I don't like naming this folder app initializer. But yeah. So let's see, what are we gonna do here? So we're gonna create, so what we could do here, we could like call it like, yeah, I really wish there was another word for it. Like you have the app, but you also have the main experience. And sometimes that's explicit. You could call it like editor, if it's like an editor. But here it's not like, there's nothing specific. It's like it has a dashboard, it has grocery lists, and so on and so on, but it's not really... well, I guess I could call it dashboard, because that's where you start from. Everything else is kind of a subview. Okay, let's try that. Dashboard, create dashboard. Oh, sorry, this will be dashboard. So when you're signed in, we have the dashboard, and we also have a user, and we don't really need the family DTO here because it just has an ID, and we also have the ID on the... So maybe the family DTO would have like a family name at some point or whatever. But now the question becomes like, when you're going to consume this view, or when you're going to consume the dashboard, you would use a hook called use dashboard, which checks if the app is signed in. And that's also kind of weird, right? So if I want to use the state of the dashboard, I go and check if the view is signed in. It makes more sense to check that you're authenticated. Yeah. I'm trying to think back on like Cosmos version 1 as well. Like, would you... Like there we would have an editor, but that's different, because in Cosmos version 1, you would be anonymous as well. Like we would run the same editor if you're anonymous or not. You would just have, it's kind of like the same app. What do I think about this? What I really like about this though is that you actually do see all the different views of the, which is really nice information to have when you try to understand how the application works without having any sense of like the actual elements and all that stuff. And you can even use that term as something to communicate. Like when you get like a mock-up from a designer, you can talk about that as a view, and you can identify the different views and what state those views have without talking about the specific elements. And then you can actually go and implement that. Well, the elements might change, right? You might move stuff around, but the functionality of the view is the same. No, I really like Vue. Let's try it. So, but the thing is, like, would I do use signed in Vue? I would use dashboard, right? But maybe I would rather do that, like use dashboard, use user, and they would check if you're signed in, and then it would throw if you weren't signed in. I think that makes more sense. Like you can have, that's the point. Like, how do you actually consume the state from the state store? So in Overmind and traditional global state stores where you don't care about strict null checking, you would just point to the root, right? And you would just dot into whatever you need. But when you have these unions of what's actually available to you in these different states, you have to check. Like you have to do an if statement to figure out if I actually have access to the dashboard or the user, for example. And you don't want to make that check in every single component. So the way you get around that is that you say, for example, you can say use app, and that would return like how should we let's just do this, const app as app view, just so we have something to play with. You would just do app, right? And then you would do use user app.view equals sign in. You would have app user app. Oh, is it view? No. Oh, sign in app.user, or you would throw. And you would do the same for dashboard, and anything that's gated by a specific state, you will create a hook for it that validates that can you indeed use this state at this point in time. And I remember being in discussions with just context providers in React where, do you really want it to throw an error? Like it completely breaks the experience for the user. Like if you did a mistake there, because you don't, that's the problem with UIs and decoupling it. Having decoupled UIs is, and not like make it rigid with props passing, is that you don't get any help from the type checker if you use state where you're not supposed to. And it just becomes a bigger problem when you have global state stores. Like in theory, maybe not as much in, probably it's very rare in practice from my experience, but in theory, you just don't get any type errors if I would use user in a component that doesn't actually operate within a signed in state of the application. And I remember discussing like, oh, maybe we should just return some default state so at least we don't blow up the application. But to me, that's like a band-aid. You should really throw, but it might be some scenario that you don't discover where it happens during development, and then it happens in production, and that sucks. But yeah, I regardless, you have to decouple at some point and take that risk, and I think this is where you should take that risk. Like the alternative is to pass everything as props. And that's just horrible. I wish there was a way to have some kind of contract. So for example, if you look at a file, if you look at a component file, being able to say that this component consumes this context. And then you would have the type checker. Well, not type checker, but linter or whatever, that would actually take that component, check its references, like where is this component used, and then find the provider for that context and see if it's actually part of the component tree where that component is used. That would be a very helpful tool. That sounds difficult. Anyways, no, I'm just gonna check. I need to get to. Oh, what happened there? There we go. I feel like I'm on a roll here, but just checking if anyone needs my attention. We're fine for now. Okay, so we're gonna have. Yes, we already have the dashboard here. Okay, great. So when we're signed in, we're gonna have a user and we're gonna have the dashboard. And that's what we consider our signed in experience. That's the first thing you hit, the dashboard. And from there you navigate to these other views. Nice. So what we want to do here is we want to create a signal, because these views can change, right? So we want a signal which represents the actual view. So we're going to create a view based on the authentication state. So let's define that down here. Create view. Auth state, which will be what do I call it? Oh, I call it session state. Okay, well that's fine. Session state. Maybe I should call it session instead. Yeah, let's do that. Rename session, create session. Yeah, let's just do that. Create session. And then we have session, and we have session state, and then we have session state. And based on that session state, we're going to create a view. So we could switch on the session state. That's always. And if you are authenticating, we're going to return. Yeah, and this is going to return an app view. And this is going to return a view called signing in. And if we are unauthenticated, we're going to return a view that's called signed out. And we're going to add some more stuff. Yeah, but there's another issue with this. I want to avoid creating interfaces, like manually typing the interfaces. Like here, we would have to oh wait, no, maybe that's fine. What I meant is, like, I don't want to type, I want to rely on inference. So for example, here I do rely on inference because the dashboard is just the return type of creating the dashboard. But for example, with yeah, so sign out would have to be like put here yeah, but that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Yeah, maybe that could even be part of the dashboard. You know what? Maybe that should just be the, we have the dashboard, and then we're going to pass the user in there. We're going to pass everything in there. And then when you're signed out, you will have something else. You know what? And maybe this should be dashboard. So that's what I mean. It's like when you think about app view, you name the view, right? You don't name. So here signed out would be sign in form or something. Or just sign in. So states are typically named what's happening, or not what's happening, but how should I put it? It's more of a technical term, while a view would be more of a conceptual term. So if a designer came to you and said, okay, this is the sign-in page, for example, or sign-in view, or this is the dashboard view, that's what you say. You don't say the signed-in view. It has a name. Anyways, and then if you are authenticated, we're gonna return a view of dashboard, and then we're gonna have the actual dashboard, which is create dashboard. Cool. Okay, so I do think I like this. I like this idea of yes, I think this is gonna be, so I think Overmind is incredibly accessible. And I think that's a good thing. So depending on your experience and to the degree you care about like the correctness of the ability for TypeScript to understand the structure of your state and kind of help you when you go wrong, like to the extent you care about like having very explicit states and all of this stuff. This is lower level. It's more technical. I'm trying to think about what the benefit of that is. Is it just to tend to my obsession? I have actually reflected on that many times. When we built the V2 editor, it was based on what everything we're talking about here. Like, how do we actually properly structure an application for TypeScript? And if you just use React, you have context providers. So then you're in this domain of doing this. Only that you don't have like, these are just contexts, right? But then we got into this huge ass issue of what is the state management of our app. We were using primitives from React to define the state and do actions and all of this, and it just became super verbose, tons of indirection with effects and very difficult to understand. But we wanted to get away from this global concept and have like strict null checking. And that's why we introduced state machines in the V2 code base. So we used reducers, but with state machines, because they also are like, in terms of strict null checking, you're kind of with state machines, you're forced to think about what we're seeing here. Okay, what is the current view? What is available within that view? What is this other view? What's available when you're in that view? And so on and so on. It's actually a really beautiful thing. But the way we used it was just horrible, and we had a lot of performance issues and so on and so on. So when I reflect back on that, we could have chosen to just use Overmind again. And we would have been way more productive using Overmind. I know that for sure. But again, we wouldn't have explored all of this stuff. Yeah. But the point is, you can, to some extent, like the problem with Overmind is that, so in Overmind, you can think about this as namespaces. So you have like a app namespace, and then you would have a dashboard namespace. So app would be like your root namespace, and then you have dashboard as another namespace with state and actions and stuff. But from what I remember in Overmind, you can't just instantiate a namespace. Oh, funny. Like, you see this? You have to define the state of the dashboard. You have to define the dashboard. It needs to be there from the get-go, but it has an empty shell. And then when you route into the dashboard, we call an action, and then that action starts like populating that dashboard. And maybe there's like a state that says you're on the dashboard, and so on. But here it's almost like we're adding that namespace when it becomes relevant. When it's actually going to be consumed, that's when we add the dashboard. And it means that you can also do things like, when you move away from the dashboard, you can dispose of it, so it's not there anymore. So all that state is just disposed and it's not accessible. The point is that in Overmind, you would define the dashboard like this. You would have actions for the dashboard, and you would be able to access those actions even though the dashboard wasn't there. It wasn't initialized or anything. But you know that as a developer, right? That's the whole point. It's like you kind of put on paper what the application is and what it can do. And you use just a bunch of default values to express that. But then it's in your mind as a developer when you're supposed to use these different things. Which is easy to do when you build it. But then you have someone new coming in on the team. And the great thing is that they can actually look at this structure and they can see the whole application and everything. And then yeah, so they have this really great overview, but they don't have the same knowledge as the person who implemented, like this implicit knowledge of when can I actually use the actions of the dashboard and so on and so on. But I think they learn that very, very quickly. Because it makes sense, right? You use the actions of the dashboard when you're on the dashboard page. But technically, you can kind of use them whenever you want. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, exactly. There's some productivity. Yeah, and I wonder if that productivity is there because you don't have to. You can rely more on. You can share the load between Overmind and your own mind, kinda. You don't have to. You can kind of just dump this flexible, open understanding of your app into Overmind, and then you will know where things are to be consumed, when things are available as you like implement your components and start consuming it. And what I'm trying to do here is like completely like, yeah, add these constraints so that yeah, you don't, like, you should be able. Yeah, I don't know. Just the fact that you can use these hooks whenever you want, and they might not work. That's like, that's not constraints. That's like, you're not much further. Um, this is very interesting. Like, if, okay, so let's imagine we were going to do this. So what I do, one thing is like conceptual overmind, another thing is the implementation. And you can still think overmind here. So we could just instantiate the dashboard immediately, just create the dashboard and have it available here. But we would do like we do in overmind. We just give it default state. And then when you're signed in, we would go in and change the state and start loading up things. You know, maybe that is better. Like, just the fact that, because then you would never get into errors, right? So what's interesting about that is what was I gonna say? Oh, generating my overmind namespaces with all GQL actions and effects and types. That's interesting. That's something I would love to see. Do you have something open source on that code gen? That's really cool. What was I gonna say? Yeah, so you have this use app, right? So what we could do is, if we use the overmind mindset, you would just have the app, and you could always point to dashboard, but the dashboard might just have empty state, right? Because you haven't authenticated yet, so it's just empty. Let's see the example here. Yeah, but that's kind of the issue, because this is so annoying. So this is a perfect example. Like, user, when you have this default state, it's amazing to understand like what state can be here, but then you have user null, right? It's a perfect example. So is authenticating, yeah, it doesn't matter. The user is null. So whenever you point to user on your app in a component, you'll have to check, is the user really there or not? But there are certain components where you know the user is there. So if you don't have strict null checking, you completely rely on your understanding of when the user is there. But I think that's a really bad experience. The user should sit behind an explicit state that you are signed in. But what you're doing is that you're just replacing that with that's the funny thing. It's like, okay, so let's do use user. So let's imagine user is null. And to avoid TypeScript here, so we would define the initial state of user as null. And we would have to do that. Or we would do throw new error. Oh, is this? I think this is undefined. So if it's null, you would have to do this app.user or throw new error. You would do that, or you would just do app user like this, or you would just use, or you would have to do like an if in the component. So you would do if app.user and then use the user. Like this, to make TypeScript happy, this is what you would have to do if you were to follow the Overmind mindset. And what I'm arguing here is that you should gate it behind a specific state, or in this case, a view. But you will have the same issue. Like if you're going to do use dashboard, you would still have to app.view equals dashboard. Then you do app view dashboard, or you would throw an error. Right? So you're not really solving it in that sense. So what's better here? Is it better to just go in and just create a default state, empty state of the application? You have some initial navigation going in. You trigger all the loading of the state. You set the initial view. And then go from there. But then whenever you want to use something, that's the problem. Because this is definitely harder to understand. Like in some sense, it has some benefits because it's very explicit about what are the different views and what's available in the different views. That's really, really nice. But union types and understanding how TypeScript handles this and so on is harder. And we also have another problem here. It's like, I think like, for example, here, when you're on the dashboard and you go to the groceries list, that's like a sub view. So the dashboard should actually load all the data immediately, and then to kind of preload all the data. So when you move to the groceries list, you already have the groceries list. But then that would be like a sub view of the dashboard. But that means that you can still do things on the dashboard, which you shouldn't be able to do because you're in a different view. So you could argue that this is so interesting. You could argue that groceries is a different view. Groceries. But now we can't co-locate the data. We can't preload the data because we can't preload the data in the actual app because the app handles authentication. You can only preload data if you're actually authenticated. So it just me having such a hard time expressing how the app actually works through this, and then try to teach people about these unions and how they should. It's kind of like a state chart, right? You just draw these books, and then okay, from here you can be kind of like what I did here. Where is it? What you do here, it's like you create this state chart of so this is like Firebase authentication. We call this like, currently I'm calling this the app. And then from there, you can be, well, I guess I should rather do, let's see. Sorry for jumping around, but this is a good way to explain. So you have, oh sorry, you have the app here. Let's still make that red. And in that app, you have, for example, Firebase. That doesn't have any states, right? But then you have authentication. And authentication can be two different states. It can be, let's see, let's make that green. It can be authenticated. Let's just simplify it. It can be authenticated or unauthenticated. And from that, you'll get like a new you kind of get a new store. But I think this is more like a UI. Like one thing is what's the current UI? Another thing is where is like data and state stored. Like when you're on the groceries page, for example, you can use a state chart to show how you get into that groceries page. But it's not isolated. It uses things from other places. So for example, this preloaded groceries list is not part of the groceries. It's actually part of something else, some parent thing. I think I have to stop the stream and do some actual work. But this was really helpful for me. This was super helpful because there is this, like you're trying to find a silver bullet here where you have Overmind, where you just shove in everything. This is how my application looks like. It's currently empty, but this is how it looks like. And then you start running logic to populate that state. It's coming from a route, it's coming from an interaction. You start populating it. Which makes so much sense. It's so easy because you just go there, boom, 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 just insert everything. And you skip this problem of like using things where you shouldn't, because it's always there, it just might not be active, which makes sense with the user, for example, that it might not be there. You're saying that you might not have a user, but if your application requires you to be signed in to be used, then like 99% of the components, the user is actually there. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I remember. Um, I remember that being like a very early design decision. Coming from Cerebral, is that this context you have in your actions, that is always the root. And I remember from one of the videos, it's very hard in the beginning to understand the structure of your application. And some like the specific domains or namespaces of your application, and or not the domains per se, but what should be included in the domains. And sometimes you have state that just is cross-domain, or you have behavior that is cross-domain or cross-namespace, and you should just be able to do that. You shouldn't feel like you need to jump any hoops. So that makes a lot of sense. And that's also like a more technical correct solution here. Well, technically correct is that you pass down to the namespace what they should have access to. So as you can see here, I have this session namespace or store or whatever you want to call it. I pass Firebase down there. But maybe there is a different way to think about this problem. Maybe you should be able to. Maybe you should rather be able to create views of the application, kinda. So what I mean is, so imagine you have this. So again, just use Overmind and then TSX. So let's imagine you have this state. And as I said, in 99% of the application, you have a user, but TypeScript doesn't like that. So what if you create like use, so you would do use dashboard or something, use dashboard. Let's imagine you can only use the dashboard when you're authenticated. So you would create this hook where const, how should we do this? Oh, sorry, I can just point to it. So what we could do is if no state.user or no dashboard, or maybe we could do that. You would throw a new error. You are not signed in. If no dashboard selected issue ID, throw new error. There is no selected issue. What was it? Oh, sorry. No, not use dashboard, but sorry, state dashboard selected issue ID. And then you return well, I guess it doesn't care about the user here. Okay, so let's call it use. How should I put this? Okay, let's create two hooks here. Use authenticated app, something like that. And then if no state.user, throw new error, you are not authenticated. And then we'll just return the state. And the same here, use dashboard. And then we have this thing where if there's no selected issue ID, it means that there's like, it's not been initialized or something. Dashboard. And now if I have my state is use authenticated app, or let's call it app. So now you should have, well, I guess, we'll have to type this. Type state. Oh my god. Let's drop the form. Boolean string. Let's just do that. The string or string or null. So user is username string or null. And then we say this is state, like that. And then, yeah, so now you have the user there. I'm not sure why it says or null here. I think maybe this is just because. Which version of TypeScript am I using here? Does it say? Hello. Package.json TypeScript 5.2.2. I think there's a new version of TypeScript. Yeah, 5.5.4. Let's see, where are we? No, it still says or null, but I made a check on it. Oh, it can TypeScript can I do like, no, I can't do that. That's the state. Why doesn't TypeScript do that? What's this called again? It's called it's called narrowing TypeScript, not narrowing. Stay checks. Blah, that's not helpful. Yeah, I thought it would. Well, it kind of is. Like if I don't have that check here and I do username, do you see that? Now I get an error. But if I have the check there, oh, I still get an error. Okay. Why doesn't it handle that? Use workspace. Oh, there we go. No, I thought I fixed this. TypeScript object property check narrowing not working. I'm not sure if narrowing is. Doesn't know how to do on an object property like ice cream where you're indexing. But I'm wondering if it's because I'm saying this is state. Type narrowing of an object property. So What? I thought this should work. Is it because I'm doing this? No, that doesn't help. I find this weird. I thought this would work. Because if I return state.user here, then it works. But it's not able to do it when it's still part of the... Because the point is that I think this could be a way to solve the issue. It's like you allow for this default state. You could even have how do you do that? This will not work. Yeah, discriminate unions. Yeah, no. That would be interesting. That you could like, you would have this default, but even doing this also feels icky. You're saying user string or null. Like most things could be null. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think it's just what's it called? Limitation of TypeScript. As you see here, it actually returns this state type, and this it's probably not designed to be able to do this, because it would have to infer what is now the type. Which I guess is like probably challenging. It's so funny to me that this is so at odds with each other, because this makes so much sense, this thing. But I kind of, there's something about thinking about this as state views. It's like, let me consume the application in this state. And the way you do that is you just you give it a name, and then you verify that those states are, like, the application actually is in this state you want to consume it in, and then you get that state. I guess you could do something like, what would be interesting here is like if I did is authenticating dashboard user, and then if no user, throw new error, no user, and then you would like return is authenticating dashboard user. now it would work. But that's like verbose. But it's almost like but yeah, but maybe this is a good takeaway for this stream. It's like there's definitely something about just laying out the full state of your application, and then you dynamically like update that state as it's being interacted with. It being a route, it being an actual user interaction, doesn't matter. But then you avoid having to create, yeah. But then you avoid creating these unions, and you're not forced to think about your application state as this like complicated state chart of different unions and how to like implement that. You can just lay it out. But then how do you solve strict null checking? But it's like you say, like I've never been more productive than when I worked with Cerebral and Overmind. So maybe you just don't use strict null checking with these solutions. It doesn't help you. And I know that's the biggest problem adopting TypeScript. It is strict null checking because it's up in your face, telling you that you're doing something wrong. But for you, it makes perfect sense what you're doing, and in reality, it's perfectly fine. Maybe this whole journey is like fuck strict null checking. I wonder if anyone else has that. Is strict null checking worth it? Are they really worth it? Yes. Yeah, might as well not be using TypeScript. Yeah. Best practices. I wonder. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, that was a short article. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, I can't decide on this now. I need to think about this. But this was very, very enlightening. Like the trade-offs, right? There's again, I guess I'm repeating myself. There's a definite value to be able to define your state management in its the whole state management as is. Only that Some of it is just not instantiated, and you express that with a null. And then, but then we can't figure out how to efficiently handle strict null checking. That's the downside of it. But then you can do unions. And the benefit of doing unions is that it does give you this additional explicit state of your application. But it requires you to think a lot more about what are these actual explicit states. How should I structure the application? And so on and so on. But that's kind of what I was hoping, this concept of, if you can think about your application as a set of view unions, maybe that would help. But then we got into this thing where, okay, we have a view called dashboard. Great. We have the dashboard there. We want to preload all the data for groceries and everything. That's like subviews. Yeah, but maybe that is perfectly fine. And then what would theoretically happen here is that when we create the dashboard here, we will pass in Firebase, we would pass in the session, and within dashboard, we would go and preload all the data and everything. But then we would also have some dashboard. We have a dashboard view, which will be, well, the dashboard itself, but it could be groceries. Because what I'm really seeing here is that these stores, it's almost like they should return a union of views. That's what I'm feeling here. So that you would do this. Because then, okay, so what about, like, now these are just functions and return statements, right? It doesn't have any conceptual meaning. But the thing about like Overmind is like a high abstraction. So you have these very explicit like state actions and effects. But those, we can apply terminology to this. So you can say that oh yeah, I should stop, but I can't. By the way, I'm gonna fix that latency. Let's see if I can find it here, so I don't forget. But yeah, thanks. Thanks for joining. Like, your comments on Overmind really helped me reason about this. So what is it? Video, screen sharing, stream. There it is. Frame. Oh, or is it part of? Yeah, it is possible to set the latency somewhere. I'm gonna check that. Let's see. I'm gonna Ecamm set stream latency. Go to YouTube. Oh, they have to go to YouTube. Let's see if I can. Where was it? Settings. Wait, where was it? Stream or manage. Oh, yeah. I think I have to create the stream first to be actually able to set the latency. So like plan. Yeah, it has to be possible to. Yeah, it's kind of weird. I don't know why it doesn't have. Like it has, I guess you can't see this, but it has like a stream. Oh, wait, I think I can destinations. Connected destinations. I think there's like a. I think there's like a stream size. High quality video mode, picture in picture. I think there's like I thought there account. No, stream. I thought there was like YouTube settings here somewhere. Anyway, sorry. I'm gonna check that later. What were we doing? Yeah, so what we can say is that like with Impact, your create is stores. A store is just a function, and what's it called? The the way to do it, the recommended way to do it, the best practice, whatever, is to create, name it, create something. So create app, and these stores should return a view or a union of views, or can return a union of views. I guess I have a patterns section, because that's the thing about lower level APIs, is that you want to highlight patterns as opposed to this is the API. Like the API doesn't tell you how to use it, because you want more flexibility, so you can use it in different ways. But as a pattern, you return a union of views from the store. And by doing so, you can create like a hook. So here we can do export const use app. And what we're going to do here is that we're going to say app. And we're going to do this. We're going to call it, because it's a signal. So that means whenever this view changes, this hook makes a component. So it's observing the app itself. And when you use the app, it will update whenever the view is changed. And then you can do things like export const use dashboard. So that would be, of course, use app. And then you would do dashboard. Oh, sorry. Yeah, use. Sorry. So if let's just do const app and use app. So if app view equals dashboard, well, not equals, you would throw an error. And then you would return app.dashboard. Sorry, app view.dashboard. And again, you would call it, because it would could have, or it could work like this, because that's also a set of views. So the point I'm making here is that I've never really reflected on that these stores can actually return signals, and those signals can represent different views. So you can observe the you could even call it a view store. So what's great about this is that now the dashboard, it can still hold all these preloaded data and everything, because the views aren't yeah, this is really interesting. Yeah, because now the dashboard is a set of views, but you can still, like in the store, you have like all the preloaded data, everything. But it just has a set of different views. We're definitely going to try this. I'm going to stop the stream for now, but then we're going to try this. So that would be a pattern to build an application, is that when you structure your application, think of it as a set of views. Don't think about the elements within the views. The view can be seen as a contract between state and elements in the UI. So when you create, I'm not sure what to call this yet. Like when you call create app, you're producing the state. How should I put this? Yeah. So when you create a store, whatever you're going to call it, you can return different views. And then you can instantiate and do whatever you want collectively for those views, right? What's shared between those views. And then within each view, you actually instantiate the view itself. And that can be another union of views. I hate using the word unions. But as you can see here, like the actual app has 3 different views. Either it's signing in, it's signed in, or you are on the dashboard. But when you're on the dashboard, you might move to the groceries, you might move to dinners or whatever. So that's also different views. The one thing I don't like about this is that we're calling the view dashboard here. But you would also call it dashboard in the dashboard, like the default view. So what you would ideally do here is like you wouldn't have this union. You would just have dashboard, right? So you would have like, so app view is like dashboard view, signing in view, or sign in view, right? You would have them like this. And this would be like, if you had classes, this would make more sense. Because what you can do with classes, which you can't do with functions, is that you can check the instance of. Which you can't do with plain functions. So that's the benefit of classes, is that you can create a scope of state management that you can check the instance of. Yeah. Hmm. But maybe that's fine, right? Uh, maybe the dashboard didn't return different views. Maybe it was just a dashboard. It's just that the dashboard has different views, and one of those views are the dashboard itself. Yeah. But then again, like, yeah, this is really interesting because then you can co-locate logic across these different views as well. I think there's something to this. It's just not purified yet. But here you can also see an issue. Like you have use dashboard. Well, I guess that's not a problem. Well, it is a problem because now dashboard would have, like, that would be any of the views, right? So use dashboard here means like use use the views of the dashboard. But what if you want to interact with the actual dashboard? Then you would have to, what would that be? Use dashboard, and then you would check, like here, you would have view equals dashboard again, which is weird. Which is definitely weird. But I do think I think this is just wrong. Like it isn't a dashboard. You're not on a dashboard and then you're like selecting sub pages on the dashboard. Like it's its own thing. But now that we have, where is use app? Yeah, but this is also, I don't like the term app. What is the app? Does it include authentication? Because this isn't the app view. Well, it depends on how you look at it. Are you authenticated or are you not authenticated? Okay, I think that's enough. So I'm gonna reflect on returning a signal representing a view so that you can observe which view is active in the component and then go from there. I do wonder what's gonna happen though. Like, if you're here and we do use app, now we're observing that signal. And then we go in and we observe the dashboard. But what if we change the signal? What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen is that impact is gonna trigger this one first because it was registered first, and it's gonna run the components. I wonder if it's gonna unmount this before, like, is this signal gonna be unregistered before as part of React unmounting the components? There's a risk here, I think. It's not, maybe not a real risk, but something to test is like, what if impact would trigger this signal? Because it does it synchronously. It triggers this signal before React has unmounted it. And now it would throw an error. That's interesting. I don't think that would happen. But what I really like this idea of returning a view. Because then we can say here, and I don't think we really need, I was hoping to get away from this. You don't really need that. But then you need to say as const. That's the only thing. Oh, it would be great if you could do like something like this. Like you could say that a return type is a const. That would be amazing. Is that possible? No, I don't think that's possible. That would be amazing though. So you just say that whatever it returns there is a const. Then that would just work. Because you can do this and you can also do this if you want to do that. But that's kind of that's also a problem with unions, is that you have to explicitly type it, which is not ideal. But the point is, like, now I can say when you're signing in, we can check if you have a new version. But when you're on sign in, then you can check if you have a new version. Or when you're on the dashboard view, you can also check if you have a new version. Yeah, the hook mounting behavior. Yeah, exactly. Because you tried impact before the pivot. So the pivot, maybe I can look at the documentation for it. I would encourage you to look at the documentation again, because I did realize that the problem we had wasn't really like, where's the, so this is the old impact. This is where you would have like, you would create an impact store, you would consume that at the top level of your application, and then based on some state or whatever, you would mount some other part of your application, and then you would mount another store. Like you would use a store provider and mount another store. But that store could still use this other store that's higher up in the component tree. So as you say, like the mounting behavior. But in this version of the new impact, you are much closer to Overmind. You have a single entry point, which is your app, and then you build up your hooks the way you do in Overmind. Like you have, like your use app is just the instance of your app, and then if you want like nested hooks, you would always start from the top, and then you would just like create nested hooks. So you don't have that in between components, mounting and all that stuff. It's all a single entry point. It's just instead of having an object of state or a namespace, you create a function. And that function just gives you a lot more flexibility, arguably too much. But you can think about this as a namespace, where instead of defining a state object, you create like the signals. And then instead of defining actions as like an object, you return the public interface of that namespace with whatever signals, whatever functions you want to be public. Because that's a problem with Overmind, right? You want some actions to be private and some of them to be public. But in Overmind, you can't do that. Everything's public, and you have to use naming conventions, for example, to make things private. But since we have this scope now, this function scope, we can make whatever we want private and whatever we want public. And then in terms of effects, that's just something, create Firebase. That's basically an effect. It's nothing special. But that's also the problem, right? It doesn't have these explicit concepts. But yeah. What were we doing? Yeah, let's call this, I'm just gonna try to say as const. It's almost like, yeah, it really sucks that unions are awesome. Like, what do you say? I love unions, I hate unions. Yeah, I wish there was a way to, I really wish there was a way to avoid this union. You could do it with a class, as I mentioned, but I don't want to use classes. I want to use functions. But then to be able to identify which view it is, you need to give it a property. And to give it a property, you either have to define a type for the view, or you have to use this as const thing. But maybe it's fine. Like, again, I constantly overthink this. But then it's like just a naming thing. Like, is this the app? Is it the dashboard? This is the app. But if this is the dashboard, then there's a dashboard within the dashboard, because the dashboard, like, I think this should be called something else. The term app is so conflated. Is that the name for it? Conflated. But it's really nice to have a folder called app. what would you call that? Like your app is your authentication as well, but you don't really, what's the experience? Well, I could call it family scrum. So yeah, maybe that's the thing. Like app is a generic term for like starting up an app. But then when you're authenticated, that's when you actually hit experience. Yeah, I'm not sure why I'm so hung up on that. But then you have, but then there's some quirks around like, if I'm authenticated, I should also be able to check if I have a new version. And then you have like, create family scrum here. But then if you're gonna check if you have a new version, then you have to have use family scrum. God damn it. Why is this so difficult? Why is this so freaking difficult? Like this should be straightforward. Every time I talk about this, it makes a lot of sense in my mind. Sometimes you have things that makes theoretically a shit ton of sense, but in practice it just falters, and it's really hard to identify why, because it's so clear in your mind why it's beneficial. And this is definitely one of them. Like being able to read in code that we are, for example, with the session state, that either we're authenticated, we're unauthenticated, or we are authenticated, and you can explore what properties you have available. And the same for views, like either we are signing in, we are on the sign in view, or we are on the family scrum view. Like it just makes sense. But I really want this to be create family scrum. This is what I want. And this will be create sign in, and this will be create signing in. Like this is what I want. The problem is that there's no way to, how do you check which oh, but maybe oh, but maybe this is, maybe I'm circling back here. Maybe I am circling back here. No, I'm not circling back here. Because if this was new, signing in view or new sign in view. Like it would work. It will work perfectly. And again, this can be yeah. Like conceptually, I think you have to be able to do this. Like not have these freaking unions. Like you can still have, it still is a union. It's just you don't think about it as a union. You just say based on this state, create this view. So within like the family Scrum, like new family Scrum, within new family Scrum, you would have like you would also have a view, right? Are we looking at the dashboard, the groceries? What are we looking at? And then you would create groceries, you would create dinners, you would create whatever based on the active view. That makes a shit ton of sense to me. But because we're using functions here, we need to have this additional name for it. Which means we need a union type. But maybe it's fine. Maybe it's fine. Type app view. View is signing in. Oh, equals signing in. Or view is sign in. And here we should have has new version, which is Boolean. Or you have view family Scrum. And then you would do a family Scrum. Family Scrum, family Scrum. I'm calling it dashboard now, but it should be family Scrum. And then you can also check has new version here. And then we produce the app view. And we can just return view signing in view sign in get has new version return has new version. Oh, is there a promise? Oh. Observable promise. I think I'm calling it observable promise. Wait, no. Null? Boolean or empty string or null? That's weird. It's probably, oh, that's weird. Oh, sorry, it's my bad. There we go. My bad. And then we have view family scrum, and then family scrum is create family scrum. And then we have get has new version, return has new version. Oh, sorry, this was also observable promise of Boolean. Cool, and then we'll rename dashboard to rename to family scrum. And then create family scrum. Let's take a look. Create family scrum, family scrum, create family scrum. Okay. Okay, so let's imagine this is actually a good idea. So what you would do when you create the app is like you think about, as we mount the app, what are the views available here? And if you have authentication in front of your app, that's basically it, right? Maybe you don't have necessarily an authenticating state when you mount the app. Like maybe you do the authentication on the server and you know immediately when the app mounts if you're authenticated or not. But in this application, we're using Firebase, so we mount everything on the client. So you might be signing in as the application mounts. And then we have a sign-in view and we have the actual family scrum view. And if you need to sign in or if you have open family scrum, we have this promise of a new version. So what we do is we create Firebase, we create our session, we create our has new version signal, and we create our view. We can call this create app view. And then we create our app view. Let's call it app view. Or we can call it view. It's a view. So we create our view, which is signing in when we're authenticating. It's yeah. So what's missing here now is that what's really interesting now is that currently this session, it's not like a listener kind of thing. It's just a state, and we can observe that state. The problem is if we observe it with an effect, I don't like this at all. It means that we would recreate this signal because this effect runs immediately and we would just add the same thing here again, which I truly don't like. So I would prefer to actually have a proper listener here so that we listen to the changes to the state. So this is just old code. So I don't think I would actually implement it like this. Oh, this is also old. This should be impact React. So what I'm wondering if this should really just be part of the it's quite a bit of logic though. Yeah, I think it should be separate, but it shouldn't return like observable state. Let's just fix this first. Ah, I'm getting hooked on this. State. And then we move this whole thing. This is just an implementation detail. Let's move it down here. So I would prefer to have like an event listener here. So whenever this signal changes, we can listen to it instead of using an effect. Because we don't care about the initial state, we really just care about and we also want to know. Okay, I guess that doesn't matter. But there's no like easy way to do that. I think maybe we should have like yeah. So the thing is, like these observables, they could have a listener. Like you could choose to listen to any observable explicitly, which means you would do something like session.listen. And then you get new session. This is what we would do. It's like if view equals family scrum, for example, current view. So if current view is family scrum, we could go in and we could dispose of family scrum. And then we say view is create view new session. This is how it should ideally work. The question is, how do we create this listen thing? We could like manually implement it. We could add the possibility to listen to signals. I think that makes a lot of sense to be able to do that. Yeah, I think we should implement that because that's a good thing. So we're gonna make this work. And then we're gonna add dispose to this. Oops. Because what might happen is that someone, someone might sign out. Like you can't really do it now, but you could sign out, and then someone else signs in with a different account. You don't want any like subscriptions, or I guess Firebase will kind of stop all the subscriptions if you sign out of Firebase. But the point is we might have other things running that shouldn't be running. So you want to clean it up. But to me, what we're seeing here now makes a lot of sense. And I'd really like this idea of, okay, when you're creating one of these stores, or whatever we're going to call them, do they represent a view? Well, then define those views as a union. What do you have access to in each of them? And then return that view from it. And then again, when we consume this, so what we would do again, we would have use app, which would be just the app. Which will be app. So we get the views of the app, And that means the component that uses the app checks, are we authenticating? Okay, let's display signing in. Are we unauthenticated? Let's display the sign-in page, and let's check if there's a new version or the new version component. Let's mount that. And then if we are authenticated, mount the family scrum component and has new version, and still check if we have a new version. And then you go in and you have the use family scrum hook, which is basically app. You would have like a check if app, const app, well, not app, app use would be, const app equals use app. And if app view is not equal to family scrum, it will mean you're using wrong usage, or you return app.view.family scrum. And now you have family scrum. And you would call that because this is a set of new views. And then in the family scrum component, you would look at which view do I have? Do I have the dashboard? Okay, let's go and mount the dashboard. And then you would do the same again. Use dashboard. And it would use family scrum, check its view, are we on the dashboard? And then allow you to use it. But the point is that this create family scrum that returns the views also has a general scope for all the views. So you can share state and do whatever you want. Now, the only thing here that's like bad compared to Overmind is that you can only access what you have in, you can only access what you have in scope, or you need to pass in something it can access. If it needs to access something. So you can't just like do cross, you can't really do as easily do state changes across namespaces. But yeah, it's funny, like how much more complicated, like how much more of a mental exercise this is compared to Overmind. It's kind of crazy. By the way, we can move these things into it doesn't? Didn't I add? Oh, this is also interesting. Like I want to be able to dispose of. So we would kind of have to, let's see. Oh. I have to do this and then not this, but why does it say that it's not there? Oh. Oh, sorry. My bad. So in this, yeah, and then like you have use family scrum, and then you would have use groceries, and here you would use family scrum, and then groceries, wrong usage. Yeah. And then here the view would be, here it would be view or view name. Yeah, but I think, okay, that's also interesting. So we can return just a view here. What if you want to return more? Maybe it's not a good idea. As new version. So you wouldn't do this. Wouldn't do this. Yeah, and you would call this current view. And then oh wait. We will call this current view because we're extracting the actual view. And then we don't need this. Don't need this. So we would do use app will be app, and then app dot current view dot view. Wait, wasn't it current view? Oh, sorry. And then you would do this. Yeah, and we would do current view here as well. But this is like everything else, it's very straightforward. It's just this like nested structure of UI that is like, how do you express that in a global state store? That is the problem. It doesn't matter if it's like, if we did this in MobX, we would have the exact same problem. How do we like create that nestedness for strict null checking? So here we have current view. So this is how it will be structured. And I think it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it doesn't have that overmind way of using default values to get a sense of how everything's structured. Yeah, it makes me think that Like you could argue that create overmind scope yeah, so that's a thing, like with a number of nested views. Well, the good thing is like you so in this case I would create like a folder called family scrum. Then we put family scrum in here, and then we would have dinners, we would have the camera in here. So you would, just like with components, you like, well, depending on how you approach components, but you would do this nested, kind of like with Overmind as well. You create a folder for a namespace. So you would nest them. And that's kind of, this points back to like the problem of tangling state with React, is that your file and folder structure is tied to the UI. It's not tied to the actual state management of the app. But now that we separate them, like you naturally do with Overmind, you can like have a file and folder structure that represents the nestedness of the state management. But yeah, it's really interesting because like in Overmind, you think about the name. You don't think about, well, I guess to some degree, you think about the namespaces as, well, you don't think about them as views as much as maybe features. And it's the same here, right? It doesn't have to represent necessarily a view. But with like Code Sandbox, we have like one view. It's the editor. So that's easy. Yeah. So the namespaces in V1, Code Sandbox V1 is more like feature based. But yeah, that's how I would imagine it. Oh, we don't need this. Oh yeah, this is the, yeah, this will be removed actually. We don't need these views anymore. App types. Wait, where did authentication go? Oh, sorry, it's called session. Sorry. These app types, I don't think we need these anymore. Cool. Yeah. So this is how I would think about it. So you have the app here with the session and the version, which encapsulate what's in this in the actual app. And then as it mounts family scrum, that's another folder where you also have dinners and stuff. And maybe dinners would be its own folder, given that the complexity of dinners, if it had any subviews or whatever. Yeah. What was I thinking about? Was it Overmind? Yeah, oh yeah, we were playing around with this. So you could say like, what if you wanted to give a scope to Overmind? You could do create Overmind. Oops. And then I can't remember. I can't even remember that. So users model, off model, groceries model. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Because I was also thinking about maybe global state management shouldn't know about anything related to UI, not even views. It should just manage state. But then you have something like, but then how do you kind of bind them together? So for example, what if you use React Router? And that's what's managing your views, which makes a lot of sense. And it also gives even more flexibility in the sense that you don't, the application itself doesn't dictate anything about the UI. It doesn't even dictate the views, which does make a lot of sense. And then it's more like, okay, I guess that makes sense for Overmind. So for example, they have React Router, and then when the router hits, for example, did we have an example here? Okay, so when the router hits, well, when the first component mounts, maybe you call, you use a use effect. So is authenticating is true. And then you call an action on use effect, which is authenticate. Or maybe you do it on initialize in Overmind. So Overmind starts authenticating when it initializes. And then in the component, if you are authenticated, then you go and mount the next view based on React Router. Like what's the route we're on now? And you mount that view, and then you have a use effect that like manually calls the state management. For example, you load a dashboard, and then you have an action on the dashboard called initialize or something. But that's called from the component. So you just have this default state, and then you call initialize with a use effect, for example. Maybe that's also could be a thing. Because what's really interesting about Impact is that what if you open the dashboard on a selected issue? The way that would work, like you hit that URL directly, what would need to happen now is like, first you load the app, it checks what the route is, you set the correct view, the dashboard view, and then in the dashboard view, you would also need to know how we select a specific issue, which would need to be passed as a prop. And then if that prop is there, you start loading the selected issue. But if you were using something like React Router, for example, you would just, the component tree, like it would still just mount the app, and it would authenticate. So the first component gets stuck in the authentication state. As soon as it's authenticated, it goes to the correct route. And that route has like the dashboard route. It mounts the dashboard route with a use effect. It mounts the dashboard page, and that has a sub route of selected, like if it has an actual ID, like a selected issue ID in the URL. But instead of using use effects to start data fetching, now with Impact, you can just consume data directly because of suspense and the new use hook and everything. So maybe that's a thing. Because I did think about this. I don't know if I talked about it yesterday. But new module that was tied sync with, yeah, to have views in state. Yeah, because that's where I'm really getting stuck here. It's like I'm trying to dissect. There's an obvious benefit to doing this, which is you just get this natural, like on one side you want this app folder, which is all your state management, and you should be able to navigate it and understand how the application works. You shouldn't have to dissect your component structure to understand how your state management works. That's like one thing we want to gain from this, and that the way you fix that is going global. But then when you go global, you have this question like, how do you, well, everything we talked about now, how do you load up what you need? And with Overmind, it's quite simple because you can really define just the full default state. And then you would like use React Router, for example. And then as you hit the route, you just call Overmind and ask it to start loading up stuff. So the application, if you think about the application in terms of URLs, is like driven by React Router. It's React Router that kind of tells Overmind what to do. What was my point here? Yeah, I think my point is, and then you have something global, but you still keep like this. Well, I guess my question then was, that works for Overmind because everything's available in Overmind at any time. But because of our union exploration, it isn't. So what I'm trying to reflect on now is like, what if we didn't have these views here? Like imagine we were using React Router. Well, I don't have to remove any code. What if we were using React Router? And again, like we were blocked by authentication. The current view state on our. But do you use like current view state on Overmind now? Like how do you do it now? Like routing and the state, is it separate? Like you have just React Router and the components are just consuming state from Overmind, or? But yeah, okay, let's see. So if we weren't gonna have any views here, we would still need to so what could be returned here is if we weren't gonna have any views. Well, that's a tricky thing. Is like if the components are gonna create family scrum, like it's so. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But if we're not gonna instantiate family scrum immediately, like we do in Overmind we would like have maybe a family scrum namespace, and we would have all the actions, and we wouldn't even have family scrum. We would just have dashboard and related stuff, and then we would just have some data on the root. And then we would just start fetching data as the components ask for it. So you have like the React router moves through these nested routes. So it's authenticated. When it's authenticated, you have a use effect to go and pre-fetch all the data. It renders the dashboard. The dashboard starts populating as the data comes in. You have some actions you can use there. Blah, blah, blah. If you need a user, you would have that at the root level. But it would be a problem because the user was null. But as it authenticated, it got populated. But that's fine in Overmind. And then the question is, how would you do that here? So it would just authenticate. So we would still have create session, and the session would be a session, and maybe we would just return the session. But then you wouldn't have access to the dashboard. Yeah, needed to mount a component first. Yeah. But yes, we have the session. When the session starts, like you would still have to you could only get to the dashboard from authenticated still. Yeah, so it's kind of like, what if we, okay, so put it like this. Let's not have these views. Let's just be authenticating, unauthenticated, and authenticated. So there's no views here. It's just that when you're authenticated, you have access to create family scrum. To family scrum. But then the question is like the navigation within family scrum. If you change the route, you have a component that wants to open groceries. Well, in this case, you could have groceries. I wonder, is this problem authentication, or is it actually... I wonder if this actually is a problem of authentication. It's just this really annoying thing that's kind of part of your app, kind of not part of your app. Because what you could do when you create family scrum, you would create groceries, dinners, all these different parts of the application. The problem we couldn't do it before is because we weren't authenticated. So we didn't know what we're going to build as the initial state. And even then, you could lazily create groceries. Like if we explore that. So in family scrum, you could just say groceries. And it's not there yet. And when you want to access the groceries namespace, you do return groceries equals groceries. Well, sorry. If no groceries, groceries equals create groceries. Like you can lazily create, for some reason you wanted to do that. You wouldn't do this. You would probably like import, like you would lazily import that for some reason. Maybe it had like a huge ass npm dependency that you lazily wanted to create. So you can very easily lazy load namespaces that way. Yeah. Yeah, maybe all of this is just me obsessing about authentication as if that's like a broader problem, but it really isn't. You want your, but I remember with like Cerebral and stuff, we did all the routing in Cerebral. But yeah, still, like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, like, the reason this specifically is complicated is because you really just have this initial authenticating state. Because I'm using Firebase, and it takes time to figure out if you're authenticated or not the first time. And then I'm doing some caching to avoid that after you've signed in. But the first time, that is the state. So if that state wasn't there, it would only be, are you authenticated or not? And other apps doesn't care if you're authenticated or not. They actually load up the app. It's just a question of what they show based on your user state. Is there a user there or isn't there a user there? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's what you're explaining with the route tree and user role. It's like that. That's what I would do here as well. It's like you would have you would only have this. You would basically only have the session. And then when the session is to handle the union, the correct union thing, it's just that when you're authenticated, that's when we give you the actual create family scrum reference to avoid like having a default nullified version of family scrum. It will always be something that has all its initial values. But then we would move like this view implementation. I had this views implementation. That's actually something that I would put in React. And I think it makes a lot of sense that even though you depend on the authenticated state to access the actual state management of Family Scrum, when you have Family Scrum, you have the namespace of dinners and groceries and everything, and you can access that whenever you want and cross-call whatever you want. And you just build a UI around it. Maybe you want to build a UI where you see dinners and groceries next to each other. You can do that. Or you can do this the way it's now, where you only see one of them at a time. And then as part of the UI implementation, you decide how you navigate these different views. Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay. I'm going to drop... yeah, I'm glad we pushed through this. Maybe I would have come to that conclusion with some more reflections as well. But man, Desm, you've asked me some really great questions there. It's been super, super helpful. So to kind of finalize this, so what I could do here instead, I could move we could do what we did previously. I can't believe we're going back to this again. So we're going to make our app responsible for the session. So we're going to move that session back. Let's see. Let's move that up here. There we go. Let's remove that. And then blah, 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 blah. We're not going to do this. We're going to move this into this because it's not needed. And then we're going to take everything inside this create session. We're going to move it up here. Let's see, in there, but we're also gonna, let's remove that. And then we have the actual, actually this can also be part of this thing, I think. Oh, sorry. We can make, let's see, get session state, and then we'll return. Sorry about this. Get initial session state, and then we're gonna have a session signal here, and then we're gonna have this handle off state change, and then we're gonna return get session return session. But then what we're gonna do is, do we have all the types here? Let's move that up. What we're going to do is when you are authenticated, you're also going to get access to Family Scrum. Like so. And then we have session state, blah, blah, blah. And then there's something wrong here because now Family Scrum will be create Family Scrum. Why are you complaining? Oh, sorry. This is session now. Why are you complaining? Oh, sorry. So get initial session state should be session state. There we go. Session. Yeah, so one issue here is one problem here is the caching. So I'm storing, we shouldn't store the whole session. We should only store the user and the family. And when we're getting the initial state, cached authentication, what we should do then is status authenticated, and then we actually get the user, family. Oh, this is user GTO family, because this is the only thing that's serializable. The actual full-on Family Scrum thing isn't serializable. And then we create Family Scrum again. Oh yeah. yeah, and we can have functions for creating this these different states, so that's fine. Yeah. So what happens now is that we're gonna create. I can't believe I should probably check my calendar. I got completely obsessed by this. Oh, okay. Yes, I'm joining that. Okay, nice. So I have a meeting 11:45, so we have 15 more minutes. Let's see. Yeah, so what we're gonna do is let's remove this. And this dispose thing should rather be, this would be session status authenticate app.session.family scrum, and then use groceries would be app, well, use family scrum app, and this will now just be return app.groceries. Yeah, and then let's see. So we're only gating the actual application behind the session, because you only have access to the application when the session is authenticated. And this views implementation that we have here, we're actually gonna implement this. Okay, let's reason about this now, because what if I'm looking at dinners now? And then I push to the view edit dinner, and I pass in the dinner DTO. What should then happen? Almost like I'm routing, right? I'm navigating and pushing to the edit dinner route. Like, how do we activate the state management? Like, would the components be responsible for? Okay, so in the sense that the component should be completely free to create any UI it wants, we would need it to, when it wants to edit a dinner. Yeah, this is a tricky one, because what if it's a router? Well, if it's a router, it would have to be the dinner ID. Yeah, but this is the interesting thing, because yeah, like, how would you, let's quickly explore that. So you have dinners, and then you would have edit dinner, and you would pass in, let's say we're using a router, so you would have to pass in the ID of the dinner. And what you will want to do in the actual component, edit dinner. So I guess like React Router would kind of give string here, and then you would say well, it would dinners equals use dinners, which would be fine. This would work. And then you would say, well, dinner would be dinners edit dinner. You will give it an ID. And this should really return well, first of all, the question is like if this is the first route you hit, it might still be loading up the dinners, right? So what I think you would kind of need to do is, this is interesting. Well, we could we could make we could make like it depends on how you want to do it. Like if you want to edit a dinner with an ID, you would have to wait for the dinners to load. So what you could do here is like you could say just use dinners data, whatever, like which is the promise of the collection of dinners. But you can also do this. So when you want to edit a dinner, you have to do so asynchronously. Because you need to load up the dinner you're gonna edit, right? Which is fine. I think that makes a lot of sense. And the question though is, yeah, I think maybe, oh, this is so interesting. So you would have dinners here. It will be like a signal of, you would have these dinners, which would just be a signal of some dinners. And this would be a promise, right? So what would happen here is that you would make that async. And also, I think we wouldn't want to make it async like this. We will want to have, like the thing is you will only edit one dinner at a time. This is interesting. Like I could just have like edit dinner and then you kind of set some edited dinner. Well, maybe that's fine. Oh yeah, maybe that's, yeah, the point is like change edit dinner. I wonder how the fuck would you do this? This is very annoying. Like you can do a very simple approach, which is like, okay, await, like create a reference to which dinner we are editing. And then we go and like wait for the the frick, why is this so complicated? Yeah. That's funny. So let's say you have something called editing dinners. It just gives a reference to the dinners you're editing. Now the big question here is, yeah, no, that's fine. So what you would do is if so editing dinner would be editing dinners ID, for example, and if no editing dinner, so this is like very generic caching. Equals so this would be a promise that you need to resolve. So for example, you would wait for dinners. Sorry. So you have dinners. And then you will need to like find the dinner in there. And then you return editing dinner. Let's see. Sorry, we can make this better. Dinners and dinner. Oh, sorry, dinners. Yeah, this is interesting as well. Like, okay, let's not add the asynchronicity part to this. It depends on how you load the dinners. Do you make it a signal, a promise signal, or do you just like await the initial data? So let's imagine we awaited the initial data. So we would just dinners find dinner.id equals ID. And then that would be now what we could do here, which is interesting, is we could go and create edit dinner and then pass in the dinner. And then what would happen is from the perspective of the component, you would actually get, yeah, we don't have to use here even. So what would happen here is you would say edit dinner, and it will go and it would cache a reference to an edit dinner thing. They will get the dinner, and then it will just return create edit dinner. And then it will return like signals of its title, its list, whatever. And you could just point to edit dinner, just say, yeah, maybe you could, yeah, that's interesting. Anyways, so you could say like change title, blah, 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 edit dinner dot save, for example. And then you would have edit dinner saving, which would be the promise that saves the dinner. You would have access to that. So you could do like, let's see, use effect, edit dinner dot saving. Oh, this is interesting. You can't really, Well, I guess you would do saving status. And then if edit dinner, it might not be there. So if edit dinner saving status equals, what do we call it? Resolved? Can't remember. Fulfilled is the terminology used, I think. You could go and you could say like views pop, for example. So you move back from the view, depending on what you do here. And what would happen here is but yeah, I'm kind of using create dinner here. You could just have a dinner, and then you would have like change dinner title, blah blah blah. Like you could even have edit. Whatever. Yeah, I have to go now as well. Awesome. Thanks again for the discussion. And I'm glad we came to this conclusion of the UI. Like views is the UI. State management is something else. Yeah, it's just that certain state is dependent on other states. So in terms of authentication, in this case, family scrum depends on the authenticated state because you need a user and the family to understand what data to get. So some state is just guarded or dependent on other state. And the way to solve that with TypeScript is to use unions, where you check the state of the state, and then as part of that resolved state, you can access other state. And that's true for many other things than authentication, but we don't need to apply this to views. So yeah, let's I'm gonna do another stream tomorrow and we'll just continue playing around with this and just keep building the app, and then we'll tackle things as we hit them. There are definitely some interesting things here. Yeah, so what we could do here instead is like edit. Like you could do something like this, and you could say rather get, and then that would be just a cached version of the thing, and then you would do save ID, and then you would save, like you would return an actual yeah, you could return the saving promise, and then when it's saved, you would pop off the thing, so it wouldn't be there anymore. Because my question is like, when would you invalidate the cached dinner? It can't be every time you call get, because you would always, like, this could reconcile for many different reasons. So it would have to be you would have to know that when it saves, you need to navigate away so that this doesn't reconcile again and you start editing again. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Anyways, thanks again, and bye for now.